The one I'm going to talk about now has a long pedigree in pop culture. And I'm bewildered by the tree of products and owners and spin-offs and identity in all of this. And it came out in 1993, which is sort of a watershed 2-3 year period of just stuff. The way that a number of genres were now going to be done, and something generational or transnational commerce or something happened by which an enormous amount of pop culture was sort of set. This is how it's going to be. Okay, what game am I talking about? It's the Mutant Chronicles. This is actually the English language release of the original role-playing game. It doesn't have edition or anything on it. It's fresh off the originalist train. And the reason I'm interested in this dates all the way back to my initial purchase of it. Okay, little context. The Mutant role-playing game is one of the great historical Swedish role-playing games of the 80s, and has spawned any number of spin-offs and reimaginings and all kinds of things. This is related to that in some way. I don't know how. And then it was put out as inevitably, given the date of publication, with a collectible card game and a board gaming. Half the rules are built, to be compatible with the Skirmish board game of the same franchise and name. So it's all this huge product line. It is just franchised to the max. There's been a movie. I mean, the whole thing was built to be, shouldered into other media. Who knows what exists now? I mean, it's probably... Well, all of this in my preference, my range of preference would diminish it. These are all things I'm completely uninterested in, with the possible exception of, is it a skirmish board game and is it fun? Done. That's the range of my interest in any such thing. But the role-playing game has always stuck with me. I have always pulled it off the shelf. I have always almost played it and said, okay, hey guys, this is next. It's just always, it's been second in line for decades, 27 years, easy. And why? Because it's also very characteristic of that time. It is also a mess of it's popular, so throw it in. Clearly heavily influenced by the 1989 release of Cyberpunk, the role-playing game, not Cyberpunk 2020. So this 1993 game is actually much more in tune with the original Cyberpunk than what the Cyberpunk role-playing game would become quite soon. So it's gritty. It's all sorts of things. I mean, it's militaristic, and as with many European games, what you do is you take all the popular nationalistic memes or stereotypes from across Europe, and then all of a sudden those become cultures and corporations and stuff like that. And then we're just pop in the sort of 80s Japanese corporation, with its version as well. And you've got demons and mutants and mutated demons and cyberware, military hardware just everywhere. And it's a dark future. The more you read the setting, the more they said it's, very Swedish in this sense. It's so what's the future like? Oh, it sucks. Okay, tell me some more about it. What's it like there? And, what's this like? What's that? Oh, that sucks too. Oh, about that part? That sucks harder. And it's, bleak. And then you're like, oh, well, what else is here? I think I'll look around, find some more about the setting. Oh, look, that's more bleak. So yes, it's that future. The solar system has been colonized, and the corporations run everything and they're all hideously corrupt, and at least a couple of them are clearly, infiltrated thoroughly by the occult nastiness from beyond the stars, who are themselves, like invading and infiltrating and stuff like that. Oh, and then of course the church. Let's not forget, the sort of dramatically, overwhelmingly terrifying notion of the cyber psionic church dudes. So it's all familiar science fiction, but more importantly, it's pieces and bits and parts of all of familiar science fiction troweled in there. How does it somehow manage to be so compelling? They just did a really nice job of picking the parts that were usable of all these things, and also saying, "And do as thou wilt." This was to change. I mean, there's canonical characters, there's novels, there's canonical storylines, there's an endless line of supplements. And I picked up a few because they were about pieces of the setting that I liked. One of them turns out to be very significant for me. But the what happened afterward is what happened to everything in the 90s. It's exactly what happened to the original Cyberpunk, which was very much your instrument, do as thou wilt, and then all of a sudden, except that you should play this, which I wrote, and do it that way, which I wrote, and buy this one and play it that way because it's official, and all that crap. So Mutant Chronicles instantly went that way and was probably, utterly planned, like a mission to Mars, stretching out through the decade, was planned, on a timed release development, carefully invested way to do exactly that. Is succeeding far better in any such way than any American company that was trying to do that at the time. So let's talk about this role-playing game. If you dial it back to this core book, and if you just take it as is, I mean, you've got a fair amount of nicely brief setting material, beautifully illustrated, of course, and a number of other things that, it's clearly excessive, too much of too much, except then you're really realizing that, wait a minute, they keep the depth level throughout. There's no rabbit holes, right? The depth level throughout is exactly the same and very clear. And you say, oh, well, if that's like this, then this is like that. And then there's no further material that then explains to you what that consequence is. That's up to you. It's just clearly there to be done. So it's the fact that they were going for accessible and introductory, and although there may have been this implied or quite real promise of, and then we'll tell you next, you can ignore that. I'm not going to go and look at what they had in mind to develop from there. Screw you. I like your potential. I like the potential energy in here, not the kinetic energy that went in the direction you wanted to. So kind of, in a way, I'm kind of subverting them by saying, no, I'm not going to get all your shit and use it. I like what you did to suck me in because I can use that. Take your supplements and shove them up your ass and like it. So anyway, the basic ideas of the system aren't really going to surprise anyone. It's got a system that's quite reminiscent of that cyberpunk system, with a fair, and this is no surprise now that I know the history in Sweden, but a fair dip and refined notion of how RuneQuest works. So the sort of straightforward, skirmishy, nitty-gritty energy management and consequence of violence, the abilities that you get to use these scores for them, really kind of solid feeling with no surprises in it. And there's no fancy mechanisms of weird points, right, to kick around. There are games with weird points that I like very much, but then there are weird points in games where you look at it and say, actually we're doing just fine with our roll to hidden damage. Thank you. So this one's kind of like that. And it was clearly tested very heavily, so that when you say you do something, you figure out how it is done and you do it and see how it goes. I have a lot of questions. We often talk here about what does it mean for a role to fail is almost a mantra for me right at the moment. And I don't know yet, looking at this. I'm also very interested in their character improvement, which is not heavily emphasized. They're perhaps the emphasis on skirmishy stuff and the emphasis on the be in this scenario that we're about to publish, sort of distracted from the notion of how does a character grow and change. But I think there's some material in there. I'll have to review it, as my memory is telling me that wasn't that was okay. That was okay. And I'm trying to think about why it was okay, but I can't remember. Just that I had a sense of reassurance prior to my new review of it. Now, what else is interesting about it? Okay. You know how you open up a game from the 90s and there's going to be a full page thing that says the investigator, and the next one is, the gangster, and then the next one is the corporate, and the next, you see that you see it in all of these games in the 90s, and you're supposed to take one of these templates and say, okay, I'm going to play them. But there's something very etiolated about those presentations. And I could point to the White Wolf games, and I could point to a wide number of others, but not the original Cyberpunk. In the original Cyberpunk, when you played, say, a journalist, I forget what they exactly called them in the game, but basically a hard-hitting, go-get-'em investigative journalist or presenter or something, media. When you played in media, they were doing media, and they were out to do more media. You play a solo who's the gun for hire. They are out to go and get hired and go and do that thing. You play the tribal, which is kind of these biker dudes out there in the highways and stuff, and you are in your zone, you are on your bike, and you have a place to go. There is a very grounded sense of those roles in the original Cyberpunk, and the same thing happens here, because again, now these were new rules back then. The life paths had existed on and off. Someone would say traveler, yeah, okay, fine, traveler. When I say new rules, the idea of doing something with them that makes your character jump up in play was really vivid in the original Cyberpunk, and they did a really nice stripped down version of it here. A sense of, okay, here, roll your events in your life, and here's some changes and skills, and what kind of school do you want to go to? Okay, now roll on this. And it's quick, and the character sheet is small. The character sheet's maybe a third of a standard size piece of paper. It's quite small, and yet you look at him and your guy is different from any other guy and has that sense of drive. Now, if you look at the setting and the way I was describing the setting, if you're looking at the core book, you're basically a stooge of one of the corporations, and all of your skills and powers and stuff like that are all, characteristic of that corporation, i.e., character, class, setting-ish thing, clan, whatever. And you're supposed to get all ginchy about, I'm the guy who can do these powers. I'm the guy who gets this kind of gun. But things got just a little deeper and more interesting with one of the supplements. Many of the supplements I consider to be extremely beta, extremely incidental, and of no real interest. However, this one, which is Algaroth, the Apostle of War. You see, of course, there are all these demon lords, and they're called apostles because Europe. And you have this one, Algaroth, who is probably the most powerful of the bunch, has all of these citadels all over the place, which are these horrific, nightmare scapes where basically you run skirmish battles in them. But it also has a really nice bit about playing Algarothian stuff at home. Non-mission, non-corporation job, set them up. I'm at the southeast corner of the map and you're at the northwest corner of the map, and go, right? Nothing like that. There's a very nice setup of how do you play a character who is subverted by Algaroth, first of all. Done. That's allowed, if you will. The rules are there. Let's do that. And with the implication that it's not just about fighting other player characters, but that there are things you might want to do relative to what they might want to do. And it also presents a rather nice picture of ordinary life. I mean, yeah, there's page after page of vehicles and monsters and bioweaponry, right? All that kind of stuff. But it also kind of has this nice sense of what is it like to live here. And I've always found this to be a rather compelling supplement. There's another one about the church group, which I forgot to pull off the shelf, but I have it too. And it also has this weighty, just a little more detailed. I don't know what it is about them. They really didn't, for books that are full of, a whole new list of weapons and equipment and vehicles and stuff, they don't overdo it. They're usable. You read it and you go, let's put that in there. Let's have this be part of our game and let's use it. Events will occur. Choices will be made. Characters will become revealed unto us through our intuitive use of them. And if you take the logic that I've been presenting for 10 years or more, which is when handed these overstuffed, messy, throw it in and it's so cool, settings that are beyond the scope of anything except raw meat for splat for purchase. I mean, yes, remember those corporations? Yes, there's a splat for each one of them. Big yawn. When presented with these, then you say, let's pick here. And in my case, I would pick something which is a big deal on, the Brotherhood, the church, and the Algaroth supplement, and then using the core book as our nice solid base for, okay, this is society, this is what we know. We're not going off to go running off to all the websites and then pull out the board game and flip through the setting material there and point at it and stuff. Screw all that. Using the core book, using those two supplements and saying, hey, we've got here a pretty good equivalent to the early RuneQuest, Cults of Prax, and Cults of Terror. We've got a pretty good excessive cyber demon religio, dark future, militaristic, all that crap. We've got a pretty good usable chunk of playable game material to do this in, and the characters themselves, it all comes back down to the player characters. You could look at the player character and you go, I kind of care about that guy. Kind of care about that gal. She came up this way. She did that thing. She has this relationship, and she's got this, either long-standing injury or a bad rep from something or whatever. And these are the very, very usable numbers. Very few clear, non-layered numbers for what can happen. And say, well, if that's all happening here, some place on Mars or something like that, what's going on there? Look through the Brotherhood and the Algaroth stuff. Breathe a couple times and say, let's do that. Let's see where our drama takes us about this. Let's enjoy the excess too. I mean, let's go ahead and be extravagant. I mean, come on, the armor, the shoulder pads are huge in this. I mean, the pictures of the shoulder pads. I mean, did I mention all those things that were all thrown together? Now say non-ironic anime, just pour it on with a bucket and all the shoulder pads sticking 3 feet off the shoulders, and all the guns, which are like 8 times too big for, an actual gun. The 80s, haircuts and, the heretic guy, right? There he is, wears a Here he is he's on the back of the core book, right? Here's the fellow with his skin tight, leopard stripe pants going on there. So let's do that. Let's just go nuts with that. Not ironically, just as the way we're doing it. And enjoy our characters. And believe me, there will be crunch. There will be, thematic, right? There's enough content there where it's going to hit hard. But your characters are hard too. These are badasses. I'll do that.